Hi there. In this lecture we see a young Bobby Fischer playing against Attilio di Camillo. This is in 1957, the New Jersey Open round 4. E4 from Fischer. E6 from Camillo. We have D3, the King's Engine attack against the French defence. So Fischer using an anti-French system, not having the overhead of having to learn too much theory to play this. Knight G-F3, C5, G3, Knight C6. So black's setup is optimized towards dissuading E5 from white. Bishop G2, Knight G E7. However, you could argue, well, the bishop doesn't seem that great. It's just biting on G3 here. White castles, black castles, rook E1, Queen C7, C3, Bishop D7, Queen E2. And now there might be a threat of E5 emerging here. Well, definitely. To kind of trap the bishop, so F6 parries that. We have A3, Rook AE8, B4, so play on the queen side, B6, and now D4. C takes D4, C takes D4, D takes E4. Black gives Fischer the isolated queen's pawn. In this particular configuration, it seems okay for white overall. Knight D5, Bishop B2. So Fischer fianchettoing basically both bishops now, very hyper-modern. Queen B8. And white is not in a rush to take on D6 here. We see Knight FD2. And black plays Knight D8. Perhaps the bishop should move either to C7 or E7. For example, C7. White does have an advantage though with this plan, going to C4. And there are ideas of potentially A4 and Bishop A3 coming up. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting position tactically. If Bishop E7, B5, and Knight C3 puts a lot of pressure on black, this position is fairly pleasant for white as well. But Knight D8, essentially, it does make things worse. White takes on D6, and now B5. There is a plan afoot of A4 and Bishop A3 on this diagonal. Bishop C8, A4. So Bishop A3 is now the kind of threat. Queen D7, Bishop A3, Rook F7. And now Knight C4 with a Knight D6 threat to fork both rooks. We see Knight B7, Queen D3. And this actually does carry a kind of threat. It's viewing H7, not just for fun, but, you know, Bishop E4 would create more weaknesses in black's camp. So the bishops, from their fianchetto positions, they're going on to quite interesting diagonals, potentially, both of these guys. We have Rook going to D8, Bishop E4, G5, so provoking weaknesses. G6 was plausible as well. You know, this situation, it's nice for white. F5 just leaves E5 perilously weak. You know, that's going to be terrible. So, okay, so G5, we have Rook AC1. Knight going back to E7. And now a very interesting decision from Fischer indeed. It seems in one respect a really double-edged move, this next move. I wonder if you can guess it for 100 points. It's not the sort of move I'd warm up to easily, basically myself, my personal preference, but there's method to the madness here. Okay, I'm about to reveal. Bishop takes B7. These squares are already weak. You know, one of the downsides of fianchettos in general, especially around the king, are the vulnerabilities that G3 has created, you know, like the light squares. And it's giving black, you know, it seems a very scary option with Queen D5. However, Knight D6, for the moment, extinguishes Queen D5, hits F7 and B7. But black now plays a very interesting move, Knight F5, sacrificing the exchange. So black's getting excited by this diagonal. If Rook FF8, then Knight takes B7, sure, and then taking on E6 is Fischer's point. So concretely, this is just great for white. So Knight F5, though, was played. And does Fischer want the exchange? Or the bishop? If he takes the bishop, his isolated queen's pawn remains vulnerable, even if he picks up e6. He actually takes the exchange. So we do have queen d5, but look, the knight's attacking the rook. Fischer has at least 2 moves here, which are good. If black didn't play queen d5, if queen takes f7, this bishop b2 protecting d4, this is good for white. If king takes f7, g4 is good actually, and then the queen can hit h7. And white has enough time to do this because of rook c7 check, and it's the black king that's in big trouble here. You know, this position, black never gets a chance for queen d5. If queen d5, rook c7 check and mating. It's fascinating stuff. If queen d5 immediately, there's rook c7 check and rook takes b7. So Fischer's got things under control, even though he played a very controversial looking decision. He's got things under control, and there are at least 2 moves here. He plays one of them. He plays queen e4. Also f3 was possible. So for example, king takes g4, queen takes h7. This is also, you know, crushing. But queen e4 is also doing the job. We have queen d7. So if queen takes e4, rook takes e4. And then rook c7 check and taking up b7. So yeah, queen e4 parries the mate threat on g2 or h1 in style. So queen d7. And we have now just queen takes e6. Black never really gets a chance to exploit these vulnerable light squares. Queen takes, rook takes e6. King takes. And yeah, Fischer's the exchange up. And the knight can't really move without allowing rook e7 or rook c7 check here. So we have king g6, rook c7, bishop f3, bishop b2, h5, rook takes a7, rook c8. Black's trying to generate some activity, but Fischer's not having any of it. He's chipping away at these pawns to create passed pawn potential now. It looks as though, well, has white got an attack? But g4, just before black is trying to brew up trouble with h takes and then rook h8, you can imagine there's trouble here brewing, but g4 extinguishes a lot of the more menacing aspects of black's counterplay. So if we can't completely crush counterplay, at least we can take the most dangerous stings out of it. You know, if we took here, I mean, Fischer, even at this young age, he's careful. You know, this position we don't really want to see on the board with rook h1 being threatened. So g4 really is taking the sting out of things, slowing black down considerably. And now rook takes b6, rook e2, bishop c3, h3. Okay, it still looks a little bit dangerous. d5, knight h4. But here, rook takes f6 check, b6, knight f3, and now taking the sting out further, not allowing very scary stuff at all, just taking that out. Because look at white's passed pawn potential now. b7, yeah, black's put on the defensive. Bishop e5, this is over. Rook takes, b8 queening. Rook e4, queen g3. White's prepared to sack the queen against rook g4. Queen g4, d6, yeah, it's over. Black resigned here. If rook takes g3, f takes g3, bishop g4, a5, king g6, a6. You know, this is an overload for the bishop. The rook can cut the king and then d7 and then queening, as an example. But the game ended on d6. So we get to see, actually, Fischer is quite brutal in not rejecting continuations because they're scary looking, like giving this battery across the diagonal. He's also a master at taking out the sting from seemingly menacing counterplay. What's the biggest stings to take out? He's got assets on the queen side to celebrate, the passed pawn assets. He did that in style. So his use of the king's engine attack here is very interesting. Black's setup is interesting against d5, but black has to play a move like f6 later as white builds up with the e5 as a threat. So yeah, f6. And it's interesting how, you know, the queen side play, the use of the bishops here, accepting the isolated queen's pawn. There are some instructive aspects to this, and getting on this diagonal. So it's isolated queen's pawn versus kind of dark square bishop play. At this moment, the bishop on b2 seems a bit stuck, but Fischer's b5 plan really fits in well to activate the bishop on the a3 to f8 diagonal. So there's a lot of instructive points here made by the young Fischer. Probing moves, so queen d3 for the subtle probing move, bishop e4. It is wonderful positional play and daringness of letting black have that bishop with that counterpart, striking at what seems to be, very, very scary weaknesses. And these reflect later as well. But Fischer is always managing, it seems, the counterplay, or at least the scariest parts of the counterplay. So a very instructive, controlled game by Fischer here, taking out a lot of the dangerous stings and not allowing things like, rook e2 on f-takes. It's just put out of the question. So the passed pawn potential is there. Even though black's got very dangerous looking pieces, white's got it under control. So yeah, a very, very interesting game in terms of, counterplay handling, if nothing else as well. So the game actually ended on move 49, d6. Fischer prepared to give up his queen. Yeah, the passed pawns are just winning. Okay, so I hope you got some instructive points from this game. Thanks so much. Hi guys, I hope you really enjoyed this video. If you want more Bobby Fischer content, check out my Kingscrusher TV page. And if you go to the bottom of it, it starts at the bottom with 1970 to 1992. I also have 2 other Bobby Fischer courses. I found him absolutely fascinating to study. So there's 1956 to 62 early in his career, and there's 1963 to 68. So I hope you find those interesting. You might want to check them out, all the free samples. And I hope you really enjoyed this video. Comments, questions, likes, shares, always appreciated. Thanks very much.